What is up, Rad Potential YouTube, and welcome to today's video. It has been a minute since y'all have seen more of a vlog style video, but we did some cool 360 stuff. So comment below if you didn't comment on those, because it's hard for me to, I can't put regular video embedded in a 360 video. The formatting doesn't work. So the 360 stuff just has to be, that's why I'm calling it raw 360, right? So anyways, comment below on this one if you like me kind of doing that stuff. I enjoy, I'd say I enjoy filming and editing it, but those kind of take a lot longer for my computer to have to deal with, like processing and stuff like that. Anyways, whatever. Comment below if you like that stuff. I'll do more of them. It's cool to me to be able to like turn around and see what's going on. I try my best to get the good audio in there too. So like the vet, I actually use the audio from another camera. Versus the in-car camera. So, what are we doing today, though? Alright, so, this car that has been fighting me, we are getting to the end. Actually, it's the end. So, we have a coolant leak. I'm going to investigate. I'm going to pull the upper intake manifold off with the carburetor attached and look for a coolant leak. I mean, I think it's coming from there. I just refilled the water pump. I couldn't see anything leaking around the water pump, so we're going to look at the intake. And if you know, if you've been around Firstins long enough, you actually have coolant ports that run into your intake manifold here to help cool this down or heat this up quicker, or however they do it, such that it runs better with the carburetor. This motor has freeze plugs in it, but my guess is one of the freeze plugs is leaking. So that's the only place it could be. If it's because it's not coming out the exhaust, which means it's not a coolant seal. And it's not coming from the water pump, which means it's got to be that. That's the only other location. And the gasket for that bit, so the gasket up in here, it's nearly impossible for me to show you this with all this on here. But the gasket in there, when I'm like microscope looking in there, I can see that it's wet. So I want to fix that. In theory, the freeze plugs, you shouldn't have to do anything. But I do have the factory O-rings. Will be up here, just because I never use them, but I think I'm going to go ahead and just put the O-rings in addition to the freeze plugs, and then we should be good to go. The other thing we're going to install in this video is I ordered, brand spanky new, so let me get my knife, a new fuel sensor, fuel level sensor, not a fuel sensor like a flex fuel sensor or something. Nobody puts those with carburetors. So anyways, I was kind of irked just because it took forever and it was unclear. Here's residual from the last video, the last vlog video. Anyways, it took forever for this to get here, kind of. At least the shipping stuff was all jacked up. Look at that, brand spanky new. Here you go. Old and busted, new hotness. Old and busted, new hotness. So, we're going to plug this in to the wires and not put it into the tank and make sure that this thing works. So basically I'm going to set it at half a tank, make sure it reads half a tank before we put this in. That way we can verify that. A typical failure point of these is this right here. It'll crack or something and it'll fill up with water and then it just reads empty all the time because it won't float anymore. So, also the insides of this can fit. So, but anyways, new hotness. Yeah, I'm excited to put that baby on, get everything figured out. OEM Mazda goodness, look at all that stuff. So, in order to get that apart and take that out, there's a shield you have to take off right behind the wheel, which I kind of showed you. So I'm going to jack the back of the car up here tonight after I test it. I'm going to do the coolant leak first, but I'm going to jack the back of the car up, get the shield off, and you can pull the sensor out the side. I used to have a fuel tank sitting here, but I don't. Anyways, the fill pickups are on the top of the tank, so you have to drop it to mess with those. But the level sensor is actually like kind of in the side of the tank. You can reach it without having to pull the whole tank out. So I'll show you all that process and the other process. Sorry the intro was long-winded, but that's what we're doing. So let's get to it. Okay, ladies and gentle cars, we have discovered the leak. notice it dripping from the bottom of the water pump. However, it's coming from the front of the water pump. So it's coming from the water pump seal to the water pump housing, not from the actual water pump to the block. This is mildly unfortunate because I do have to remove the whole water pump housing to fix this. But it does mean that the freeze plugs are holding up. I do see, though, which is probably residual from this spraying water everywhere, but there is some water right there, and that gasket is a little damp. So what I'm going to do, because I'm already here, already to this point, I'm already going to drain a bunch of water out and make a big mess. It takes me 6 bolts to get the lower intake manifold off, put the O-rings in, and put it back on. So I'm going to go ahead and do that too while I'm here, just to ensure that the freeze plugs don't leak no matter what. And then I'm going to have this water pump off, pull it back off the front, so that way I can do that. While I have this off as well, I'm going to go ahead and service the oil metering pump, which is like, you know, stuff that should have caught while we had this whole thing apart, but you never quite know. The oil metering pump has been leaking a little bit since we've been running it, but you can literally just see it dripping out. So I went ahead and topped the coolant off, and I've been squeezing on the radiator hoses to try to get it to leak. So in order to take the lower intake and stuff off, there's 6 bolts hold it to the engine. They're all 12 millimeter. Same thing for the water pump. There's actually 4 studs. So you've got this one, this lower one here, and then that one right there, and that'll all come off. And then I just made a little gasket and sealed it up, some silicone at the back. I do have to pop the fan off, and you will have to take off your AC pulley. So, hey, remember the last video where we did a water pump gasket? Well, we're doing it again. Alright, well, I got the water pump off, and as it turns out, it's not leaking from here. It's actually leaking from the weep hole. So if those of you who've ever worked with water pumps before know, generally when your water pump is bad or the bearing dies or something, I don't know what causes it, but coolant will start leaking out of the weep hole, and that's your time to say, hey, go replace your water pump. So, fortunately, maybe unfortunately, I don't know that I would just be able to get one for this car, but when you're a parts hoarder like me, that was a new water pump when I put this particular water pump in my silver car. Good bearings, no evidence of leaking. So if this one, which it should be, the exact same as this one over here, 2 bolts close, 2 bolts far, 2 bolts close, 2 bolts far. Looks like we got the same water pump. One thing to verify is that the pulley fits and this doodad fits, because if, oh, it's looking like we're golden. Because if this doodad right here, the fan adapter, didn't fit, I'd have to figure something out to put a fan on this car. Here's another one. I don't have another one up there, but if we go to this motor, you'll see this fan adapter is different. And notice 2 bolts close, but there's 3 bolts right here. This is actually a different style water pump that's on that one. So that's like a FC style water pump versus these, which are the first gens. So you're going to see here that it's a different bolt pattern. So be careful of that when you're buying water pumps. But I'm going to switch these water pumps out and pull. You can see here we got the oil metering pump all covered in coolant, but see how it's just kind of greasy and oily. I'm just going to pop the oil metering pump off, take it apart, look at it, make sure everything's okay. I think I have some other oil metering pump lines here I can use, or I'll make new ones for that. But I may rob, I know I have right here a good one, so I may just use that oil metering pump on that engine. So, and then we'll do a video rebuilding this one. You can buy a brand new oil metering pump, but they're expensive. So, and I'm going to pull the intake off right now. I already got all the coolant drained out. Basically, I'm not even going to disconnect anything on the carburetor. Pull the 6 bolts out, sit it, like kind of flip it up out of the way the best I can. Pull the gasket, clean it, put a new gasket, put the O-rings in, and then put it all back together. It should be pretty easy. I've done like had that off before on other cars. So this right here hooks in there, and then this is what actuates your oil metering pump. So it's unfortunate that that's all leaky, but we're going to fix it. We will fix it. So this is my method to getting in there to put the O-rings on. Take a little strap, pull this back, I just hook it to the tire. Basically it holds it back. You can kind of trust some of this stuff to hold that up, but generally all the weight's in the strap over here. You will have to remove a couple vacuum lines, that are going to get stretched out just so you can get in there. You can see I've got the O-rings in there, supported with silicone. You can see that gasket's a little bit wet, but it should be good when we put it all back in. It's all intact, it didn't tear or anything. So we're going to go ahead and slap that back on. I've got the oil metering pump right here, the fresh one. We got a fresh gasket on there. Cleaned it up the best we could, and as you can see, still pumping. So we'll get this put on and hooked up, and then the shout out dog, the fresh water pump regasketed, and I have a new gasket right there made for the back of this. The front of the motor's clean, so we're going to go ahead and I'm going to set up a little hyperlapse guy and put this thing back together. Alright, my friendly friends on the tube, we are running into more issues, of course. Okay. Those used to be Phillips head machine screws. And I say used to be because that looks like a rivet, and it was a screw. So, the confines of this vicinity here is very terrible. There's really no good way for me to get my die grinder in there or something to cut those into flat blade, cut a slot in them and twist them out. So if you pop the 4 screws that surround your filler neck thing right here, pop these out, the whole filler neck can slide down. I'm going to take the straps loose but not off, and I'm going to lower the gas tank and just kind of let it hang down a little bit so that this is down here, and then I can get to everything way easier, and I'm not going to be fighting in this confined space till I grind a slot in all these with a short screwdriver and put downward pressure and get them all broke loose. Then that way, if they do break or come apart in there, I can still use an extractor or whatever to get them out so I can put the new one in. Glorious. Alright guys, so I'm going to show you my process for getting these super tiny screws out. Basically, I take my little Dremel tool right here, and I tried to cut a slot in the top of the screw. Normally, sometimes it won't work. You'll break the head of the screw off, which is not an issue, because when you break the head of the screw off clean like these, the studs are sticking up through the fuel sender. So here you go, you can see the other old and busted. Now you're going to be like, why'd you smash that in? Well, it's easier to get to everything if you just bang the connector down. You're replacing this anyways. If you're not replacing it, then obviously be more careful. So once that's done and you've got these like this, some would take a Dremel again and try to slot these studs sticking up. However, I would advise against it because these are super tiny. So what I tend to do is, and I did this I had an FC a few years back, and I was able to get this done through the floor of the trunk, but here you obviously can't do that. If you have a fresh, nice set of vice grips that has a super grippy end, see the sharp serrations, and you can actually kind of like sharpen one up if you want. You're going to take that and basically clip it on one of these right here at the end, super tight. Let's see, let's get this right, like that. And then you're just going to kind of start working this back and forth. You don't want to try to spin it so rough that the vice grip comes off. But if you just start working it back and forth, eventually it'll get loose. Or you can feel it getting loose. And I'm telling you, you got to have your vice grip super tight for this. Oh, okay. No, I think I broke it. Alright, well, that one is the first time that I've ever sheared one of these off. Glorious. So this becomes a whole nother problem that I'm going to have to figure out. Most likely will involve drilling that. But the other ones literally I went 3, came out perfect. You can see right there, just threaded it right out. So this is what I call working smarter, not harder. Battery. Sketchy wiring. Don't worry about that in proximity to my trash fuel pump, which is just something I have laying around, pumping the fuel out into this can such that I can lower the tank and not have to worry about it, and I don't have to strain the stock pump. Work smarter, not harder. New one's in. Now, you're going to be like, what the heck you got washers on all those for? Well, let me tell you. When you cut all those screws and they break, you're stuck with buying whatever you can find at the local hardware store. And what I could find, the screws were a little bit long. So, instead of spending a ton of time cutting all the screws down, chasing the threads, doing the whole deal, you just put a washer on it, put it in there. Is it tight? Yes. Is it going to leak? We'll see. But it shouldn't. So, freshy fresh, ready to rip. I tested the gauge just by plugging it into here, moving up and down. It all works in the dash. So we're ready to go. Push this tank back up, put the whole car back together, get it on the ground, and we're going to fill it up with coolant and take it for a drive. Well, actually, it's already full, hasn't been leaking anything, so we're ready to take it for a drive. Also, by request, since the fuel popper, the switch is all busted up, I'm actually going to take this off and take the spring off so that this thing just closes, like it won't actually latch, and put like a magnet or something on it, but it's part of it. Well, it's idle, and I don't really know why it took a while to start. I feel like it might have just been a fuel pump priming issue. Everything looks good in there. And getting closer. Getting closer, boys. Alright, so move this thing out of the garage, and then I'm gonna let it warm up a little bit. Like hold a bit. My oil pressure gauge still isn't working. Alright, so my oil pressure gauge still isn't working, which means the sensor that I put in isn't good. I do know the engine makes oil pressure, but I would like for that gauge to work. So I may rob another one out of one of my other motors and see if the other gauge works. I guess the one that I grabbed didn't. So I'm gonna let this thing warm up, make sure everything's good, and then I'm gonna go ahead and wash it real quick and see. Should be getting going. I gotta tidy up this little bumper thing, and how about that? Purring. All right, my guys. So I'm going to load this baby up, and take it back to its owner. So, if you haven't, or I guess a lot of you probably haven't, the story on the car, there's a guy up in Nashville, friend of a friend of a friend somehow figured out who I was. He's owned this car for like 30 years, and just wanted it fixed. And I rebuilt the motor for him last year, and then he drove it around and it overheated, and you see, water pump's cooked. Well, when it overheated, it cooked the coolant seals. So I took it, brought it back here, and pulled the motor back apart, put it back together, pulled it back apart, put it back together. Just go back and watch the corner seal video, because that was a mess. So anyways, we've overhauled the fuel system. We've got everything working. I just took it for a little 20-minute test drive. For those people that have stock 12A RX-7s with a stock Nicky, it's a good, smooth driving car, but man, is it slow. Coming from driving my Mouse, which is a full Bridgeport car in a Weber, and it rips. That thing is slow. Like, the tack barely moves slow. It's running great. I mean, it's not like slow that's broken. It's just it's pretty slow. So I'm gonna load it up and haul it back. He's excited. I'm excited that it's good. I've checked it for leaks. I drove it earlier today. It's actually like 5 o'clock now. But I drove it this morning around and whatever, and then let it cool down. I worked on some mountain bike jumps, and then I made sure the coolant was topped off, no leaks, went through the whole deal, made sure it was okay. Then I took it for another drive. Hasn't had any trouble starting, which is awesome. And yeah, just don't touch anything, turn the key, fires right up. And y'all may wonder too, one thing that this car does have is it does have an FC starter. So they're a little more torquey than the old 12A ones. It spins this motor really fast, so it lights it right up. But I'm going to give it back to him. I'm going to tell him to put like 500-600 miles on it before he really rings it out too hard. So stay under 4,500 RPM for 500 or 600 miles, and let me know if there's anything going wrong, and then he should be good to go. It's definitely not a perfect car. It's definitely like, the steering's a little loose. It's a 30-year-old car, 40-year-old car. It's 84, so don't expect them to be super mint. But with that, thanks for tuning in on the final episode with the white car, and look forward to us starting on the white rally car in the next video. So, thanks for watching. Keep it rad.